We'd gone for a big run on Wimbledon Common and he was teasing me for being too slow. 2 months later, he's dead. By all accounts, an exceptional generational talent, just had the world at his feet. And he was playing football in the garden with my dad and he fell over. My dad thought he was clowning around and he never got up.
So Gabby, I am super chuffed to have you on what is the first podcast to be broadcast from our new studio. I feel like we've suddenly grown up overnight and we find ourselves with the wooden theme of the podcast studio, which seems to be a thing because you've got it in yours
mine,
too.
Yeah.
But it feels very grown up.
It looks very smart.
So while I'm buzzing about having a new podcast studio, you should be buzzing about having a new job because the Match of the Day news is fantastic. Congratulations. Last time I saw you, it was with Chappers on the Sports Agents with Ben and I. And it wasn't sort of mentioned. No one, I think, wanted to say anything, but we were sort of secretly all keeping our fingers crossed that there would be something in the offing. And then, brilliant news that the three of you are going to do it together
a shared
and share
job.
it.
Yeah, and I'm really chuffed that we're sharing it because it's a lot.
Yeah.
There's a lot of Match of the Day, and I think we've all got other passions within sport that we didn't want to have to lose. So I love doing the rugby, I love doing athletics, and if you're doing all that Gary does in Match of the Day, and obviously they include the Sunday show now as well in the whole piece, you kind of haven't got the time to focus on other sports. Football's all consuming. So it means we can kind of share the workload and not every weekend be Match of the Day. It could be rugby or it could be athletics. So for me, that's a great balance. I'm really happy.
And I think it's a real win for, just three really brilliant journalists. I definitely grew up in that sort of Sky family where you had moved on by the time I was doing Sky Sports News from there. And, I in my world were a trailblazer for female broadcasters. So the fact that there's you and Kelly, who I work with at Sky as well, and Chappers in the mix is it's really good to see. I'm really excited for you.
It's funny. It's so interesting how the reaction to it, people, I was at a big awards last night for women in sport and people saying congratulations, and I felt a bit weird and kind of imposterish because I've done it so much over the years as a stand-in. Yeah. It doesn't feel like a new job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I know how it's not like walking in somewhere and going, how does this work? I've got no idea how this works because we've all done it. So I guess when it comes to the new season, it will feel very exciting when it's kind of all new and we're all kind of doing a little bit. It won't be totally different. Nobody wants to throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's a football highlight show, right? And we've got the same kind of pundits. But it has been lovely the last week. People coming up and saying, actually, I was on holiday when the news was announced. And on the Wednesday it was announced. And I didn't fly home till the Sunday. So I kind of forgotten about it until I got to the airport and the plane was full of British people. I hadn't seen any British people in the resort we were in. And the first person that came up to me was George Clark, the Channel 4 property presenter. He was on the flight and he went, "Oh, Gabby, congratulations on Match of the Day." And I was like, "Oh yeah." And then quite a few people on the flight said things to me. And I said to Kelly, "It's weird. This is kind of surreal being in the Maldives and having this reaction to it." But we grew up, didn't we, with the kind of sport that we consumed as kids watching on TV. First of all, there was hardly any women doing sport on TV. Well, certainly when I was growing up. You're younger than me. And the main kind of football was Match of the Day. There were no live matches really on telly, like the FA Cup and a few others if there was a World Cup and stuff. So yeah, it is one of those programs that I have grown up as a child hearing that music every Saturday night, and it feels, even my dad, who's very unprone to platitudes, seemed very chuffed.
How on earth did you lot keep it quiet? I suppose what's really nice about the three of you getting it together is that you've got each other to talk to about it. So presumably you've got like a little WhatsApp group, the three of you, where you can like go, "Oh my God, don't say anything, this came up."
I set the group up and called it the Match of the Day 3. And because obviously we were, and they were disappearing messages. Chappers was very paranoid about this. They had to be disappearing messages. And the only person I told was at home, Kenny. I didn't even tell my mum because I wanted to make sure Kenny was completely okay with the lifestyle kind of addition that this would put into our family. And it's obviously a much easier decision for me to make at the age my kids are now, than when my kids were little. In fact, I turned down a big job when my kids were very young because I didn't want to commit to weekends every single weekend at the time. I wanted to be able to be around. So it has been really nice. Kind of Kenny obviously was chuffed a bit. So he wasn't going to say, "No, I want you on Saturdays." He probably like, "Brilliant." Off she goes. But no, it's been lovely having Chappers. Obviously, I work with all the time on the Sports Agent. So we've been able to just chew over things and mull kind of, what the kind of, back and forth of what it would be and how it would look. And I think the thing that we all agree, the three of us, is that it is absolutely equal. I'm sure within a year, the Daily Mail will be going, oh, I've noticed this person's done 2 more. They must be the lead person. But he said to me, Chappers, very early on, look, he said, if the Manchester Derby's on a Sunday and you happen to be doing that show, I'm not going to be going, oh, hang on, I want to do that one. It's all about where it fits in to everybody else's
you talk about that
schedules.
balance thing of sort of family life and making it work around sport. And sport is not easy because, like you say, so much of it happens on the weekend. So you are,
and everybody's downtime.
Yeah, exactly. So you're literally going against the grain on everything like that. Do you think if Ruben and Lois were kind of younger, it would be a no? And actually now is perfect timing, because you've talked a lot about this idea that they're moving on in their lives, they're moving on in their world.
Yeah,
and that's tricky to sort of come to terms with that. So it gives you a real distraction.
Yeah, no. I think when they're younger, you're needed so much more.
Yeah.
You want to be around, and you want to go and, Saturday school sport, all that kind of stuff you want to be around for. But you're physically needed because they can't move themselves anywhere. Now, obviously, they're young independent adults who fly and drive themselves all over the place. So that is a practical thing that's, totally different. Obviously, Ruben is a professional sportsman, and I want to, and Lois does a lot of sport as well. And I still want to be around to see that. So that's where we can kind of manage things. But definitely would have been a much harder decision, I think, when they were younger.
I love the fact I saw a picture the other day of you, Kenny, and Ruben in the paper, and it was the headline wasn't necessarily about the fact that Ruben is or had eligibility for 3 different Six Nations scenarios. It was more to do with the fact that he's taller than Gary Barlow's son. I was like, victory for Ruben.
I know. When Gary Barlow posted that picture, it made me laugh because it reminded me of all our family photos. And and then Ruben pointed out that Gary Barlow's son's 3 inches shorter than him, which made me then realise that the whole Barlow family must be about 3 inches shorter, because it was the same proportions, but just, slightly different heights. But yeah, we've all got used to the fact that Ruben's super tall and big. And then I take him somewhere where people have never met him before, and they go, oh my gosh. Peter Crouch talks about this, doesn't he? How people, and Rich Osman, how people just go, you're big.
I get that in the opposite direction.
Georgie.
Everyone's like, so she just limboed in through the door. Like, oh my God, it's so funny that it's so weird that people sort of feel the need to say that, isn't it? You're so tall, or you're so small. It's like, well, yes.
Well, I think Richard Osman said something about you should never comment in the first 15 minutes on something that a person can't change.
Oh,
so
nice.
Which I think is, it's really interesting, that, isn't it? Because obviously if you say, oh, that jumper, I'm not sure, I really like that jumper. You can throw a jumper away, it's somebody's opinion, but obviously you can't change your height. You can't change the size of your nose. There's nothing you can do about that. And Ruben obviously has got very used to being tall. It's funny, we were eating at a local old pub the other day, and of course, they're lower ceilings and lower door frames. And I just realised how much he navigates life doing this.
No.
Kind of dipping his head all the time without even thinking about it, because that's just how he has to go through old buildings.
And I similarly would never get anyone say to me, watch your head. That never, ever, ever happens unless I'm on the deck of a boat, in which case it could even actually be a real life problem for me, which is a one-off. And I try to avoid that as much as possible, even with my husband being who he is.
I was going to say, it's an occupational hazard, isn't it?
It's a bit of an occupational hazard. So just sort of switching lanes a little bit, because when we asked you to come on the pod, what I wanted to do with every guest that comes on is to talk about these defining moments. I mean, Match of the Day is going to be a defining career moment, I'm sure, even though, like you say, you presented it on multiple occasions before, but this actual moment of having that gig will be a defining career moment moving forward. And we all have them in various forms. But in terms of a defining moment in your world, in your life, I know you've spoken about it before, but I wanted to touch on Daniel and what happened there and how it affected everything else moving forward and how it's probably shaped you as a person, frankly.
Yeah, it really is hard to not choose that as a defining moment in my life, because when I sat down to write my memoir sounds a bit grand, but when I sat down to write a book, which turned out to be a memoir in 2020, and somebody said to me, just write, whatever you write will be, just that's how you get going on a book, right? And I couldn't start anywhere else.
No.
I sat there and thought, oh, so I'm going to talk about this bit first. And I just couldn't start anywhere else because it really was the seminal day of my life when I look at my 51 years on this planet. And I was 19 years old when he died, because it feels like there is a before and there's an after. And so much of what has happened afterwards really stems from that day, and to do with our family, my extended family, things that I went through personally, and how it shaped me as a person. Because it's very hard at 19 to work out what you would have been like and who you were going to be, because you're still forming, aren't you? At 19, you're still kind of very much a malleable thing. I guess when something so seismic happens to you, it is very much something that can shape not necessarily the rest of you. You know, you can change the course of your life, but it does shape you. And obviously, he was only 15 years old. He was due to become a professional footballer about 2 months later. He'd already signed for Leeds United, who just won the old League One. It was a year before the Premiership formed, and he was, by all accounts, an exceptional generational talent and a really great kid. Everybody loved him. Good looking, fun. Just had the world at his feet. And he was playing football in the garden with my dad and my little brother Jordan, who was 6 at the time, and fell over into some long grass. He went to get the ball. My dad had kicked it away, and he fell over. My dad thought he was clowning around, and he never got up. And he had a catastrophic heart attack, effectively. He had a hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, which we didn't know about. It was something that he was living with no signs at all, and no physical signs. I mean, he was incredibly fit. Just the time I'd seen him before, he'd come to stay with me. I was having a gap year and I was living near Wimbledon, and we'd gone for a big run on Wimbledon Common, and he was teasing me for being too slow, and he was running backwards, kind of joking with me that I was unfit. And 2 months later, he's dead. And that, was so shocking. And, the death of a child and the death of a young person in any family has huge shockwaves and ramifications. And, whether or not they are sick for a while before, or, they've got something, I don't think it makes any difference. But the shock, I suppose, does add a layer of panic almost, and kind of fear. And, you don't have a chance to prepare yourself. And so I think it does add a different dimension. There's no better, there's no right, there's no wrong. We kind of, afterwards, we were going, if we'd known, would we have done anything different? And, I don't think it would have made any difference to the way we were as a family, or how we treated each other, or how we appreciated each other. But it definitely, I don't know, it adds a really cruel, kind of painful layer to what is already incredibly hard to deal with.
And like you say, you're just sort of a child yourself at 19. You're just trying to figure out what the world looks like. So it completely blows up everything that you thought would be the order of things, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And the order of things is a good expression, because the natural order of things in 99% of cases is that we bury our parents, and we expect in the circle of life to outlive our parents. And so when that doesn't happen, and you see your parents grieving, and you see your grandparents grieving, and those layers of family, all of the, we're quite a close, big, extended family. And my mum's originally from Leeds, and we were living in Leeds because, of course, before that, we lived all over the place, my dad's job. And so you have when you kind of have close proximity to relatives and family, and that also, you see how that affects the dynamic of everybody else. And to see my mum's mum having to comfort, my grandma having to comfort my mum as well, it's certainly not the natural order of things. And then your own life, and how you kind of perceive what you're supposed to be doing, and how, as the eldest child, I was about to go off to Durham University in the autumn, which I still did, but I kind of cancelled my gap year. I was living in London. I came home and stayed home for that summer because I wanted to be as much use as I could to my mum, and because my dad had, about a month later, picked up his job again, and he was Wales manager, and he'd picked up his work and gone off on tour. And it was, just a very unnatural thing. I was trying to run my mum's business for her and, do all these, make sure there was food in and suddenly becoming very adult.
That's really interesting, isn't it? Because what you sort of, maybe as the oldest of the children as well, you sort of assume that responsibility play. And also you want to be practically proactive to help. But then with all of that, I suppose you don't take time yourself to go through the process of processing what's happened or grieving in any way, shape or form. Did your reaction initially to what happened, did that sort of over a period of time really change?
Yeah, I think first of all, I was dynamic and practical, right? I still had my sadness and I still had just bouts of, endless crying and feeling bereft. But I think because of the fact I'd had this year away, I hadn't been with him every single day, and I'd kind of started to be the young adult that was separating herself from the family.
Yeah.
And so I came back into the family home and thought, what I can do is this will help, and this will help, and I can do these, these things. I can drive these things around for my mum. She was doing up some properties that I was dropping off things like wallpapers and trying to kind of do things that she would have been doing, as she was just, immobile with sadness and grief for such a long period of time, and practically just didn't even want to leave the house. And then obviously I went to university and started to build my own life again. But in that first year at university, I think there were a few things going on. First of all, before we started recording, we've talked about perspective, right, in life. And when I first got to university, I'd become this kind of slightly internally. I wasn't always vocalizing this, but I was like, well, that doesn't matter. Why are they getting upset about that? That doesn't matter. But of course, these things that they were bothered about, my fellow students,
but they seemed trivial at the time, right? Because you've gone through this huge grief.
They were like, oh, where are we going to live next year? I'm like, well, you'll find somewhere to live. Why are you bothered about that? Oh, so-and-so didn't get the part in the play. Oh, well, there's another play. In my head, I'm kind of ruminating all the time thinking, well, that's not big. That's not huge. That's not huge. At the same time, I was also very much like, every day you should be, getting up at 6:30 and, working hard and doing amazing things and trying to, do everything, spin loads of plates. So I was kind of this, oh yeah, I'll be in that society. I'll join that play. I'll do this. I'll teach these kids gymnastics. Oh, I'm doing a law degree, and I'll work at the radio at the weekend. So I was running around, kind of running from my grief probably. And then by the end of my first year at university, so just around the time of his first anniversary, I had some first year exams and it all kind of came crashing down. I'd stopped sleeping properly. I felt very kind of wobbly. I just lost my balance, and I went to see a doctor and he gave me some sleeping tablets. And I was like, well, that's not what I need. I kind of knew that was not the answer to what was going on. It was much deeper than that. It was the plaster, and my dad had a lot of problems with sleeping tablets through his career as a footballer. And he still at that time was probably taking them, and he said, don't take those, that's not a good route. And so I then realized I probably needed to go and speak to somebody and find some way of getting counseling. And it took me a while really to find the right person, but that was something that definitely helped, because it had to be away from my family. It wasn't about. And that's the thing about a child dying as well. You've got two adults at the centre of all this, that my parents, who normally would lean on each other when there was a problem. But this was how do you kind of lean on somebody who also needs to lean on you? And I couldn't, use them as my sounding boards because they were absolutely crushed with their own grief. So, I had to find, and my sister was back in the States where she lived, and my little brother was still at school. He was only 7 at this point,
God,
so
tragic. Isn't it?
And he similarly was living in a very different house to the one that we'd all grown up in, and
presumably you were really aware of wanting to sort of make sure that he had a childhood, like he did
at the
actually
time,
end up with a childhood.
I remember my boyfriend at university, eventually I started going out with a guy at university who was really outdoorsy, and I remember us getting my brother up to go camping and try and do things with him that, that felt like he had siblings, But I really feel for my brother, because he definitely took the brunt of it as a child, because we'd all had my sister and I had our brilliant childhood. We'd had our amazing experience of being in a fantastically happy family that travelled around and did great things because my dad had an interesting job, and we were all really sporty and did lots of lovely, kind of activities, and we were a little team together. And there was this big age gap, obviously, which would not have been a problem had my brother lived. It would have been lovely, him having siblings coming home and popping home all the time. But suddenly he was like an only child, but an only child in a house that was very, very sad and had a lot of stuff to work through. And eventually my parents got divorced, and that was messy. To get to that stage was messy, and he was at home with my mum. So he had a very different experience to all of us. And not only that, he'd been there. He'd seen it happen, and saw my dad then shut himself away and not want to really have that experience, because he obviously had felt like, I love this person so much, I can't love like this, because it's crushing me, and kind of shut himself off. And my dad wrote his book about middle of the 2000s, and he kind of apologized to my little brother in that, about how he'd done that. He'd almost just shut himself down. And so I think in one hand, I'm, I suppose, grateful that I was an age where I could start to understand, what was going on. Because I think as a small child, how do you understand that? How do you process that?
And I guess, you're such an accomplished and together person. I guess you're trying to fix things, but then you also need to fix yourself. So when you went off to try and find out how best to do that, how do you actually start the process of rebuilding when actually you'd like to think that you're a pretty together person who, like you say, doesn't need these sleeping pills and can cope and get through things, but this is something so huge. How do you actually rebuild from that place where it's been dire and you've got to find a way back?
I think I found the right person in a way by accident, who became she was an acupuncturist who really did a lot of talking. So in the hour, I did a lot of talking. And she helped me understand through those conversations. I mean, I've heard recently somebody who came on my podcast, The Midpoint, say about therapy that you might have to go through a couple before you get to the right person. And I hear that quite a lot. I was quite lucky with Wendy that it was quite early on in my journey, if you like. I thought I was coping, and I was using sport quite well. I'd go running, I would be active. So all the things that we know now are good for mental health, I was doing, but I didn't know why I was doing it. I knew I just had to do it. I knew I had to keep moving. So that's metaphorically and physically keep moving. I knew I had to keep developing and growing and trying to understand. I was brought up Roman Catholic, but wasn't particularly religious at all at university, but then found myself on Sunday evenings, there were a couple of lads on my corridor who'd go to church, and I just started following them to church. And it was a time where I could sit and think in a different space. So that helped me in a very a dogmatic way. I was just had some headspace. And I think reading and my mum was on a very much a spiritual journey. My mum was kind of trying to find answers from all over the place. She was searching, and I'd pick up some of the books she was reading at home. And then when I left university, that's when I found Wendy, when I first came to London. And I think within about a year, I knew I was starting to kind of work through things and help myself, by having those conversations. And I felt I was starting to I was a bit self-destructive in terms of relationships and, trying to fix. I seemed to go out with people that I could try and fix. And that wasn't going to be good for me. It wasn't going to be good for anybody. So I'm glad that was sorted out quite quickly.
It's funny, isn't it? When you're that kind of personality, I don't know whether that was sort of ingrained in you from a really early age to be that kind of personality. I was a little bit like that as well, where when things started to go wrong, especially I've talked a lot about it, but with Ben and I on our fertility journey, when stuff really started to go pear-shaped, I was like, right, this is the problem. How do we fix it? I had to find a practical solution. I wasn't comfortable, but I never dealt with all the other stuff around the edges. It was like, no, the practical solution is the thing that will solve it. And that sounds kind of familiar in what you're saying.
Yeah. I think we, if we are that way inclined to think there's a process and how do I get here? And, and I wanted to be as mentally healthy as possible and make the right, good decisions for myself. And listen, I think it's being in tune with your gut and your, call it what you like, that inner kind of voice and that person that the right answer. We've all got the answers, but if we're clouding them and masking them, whether that is with toxic relationships or too much alcohol or not, other, imbibing other things that aren't good for us, it could be our diet. It could be, I definitely went through a phase when I first went to Sky where I'd been this really healthy person and used exercise and diet to keep myself on track. And suddenly I went to Sky and I was living in London for the first time, and I really went off the tracks with what I was putting in my body, and I was eating absolute rubbish, for about a year. I kind of just self-destructing kind of, I'd leave Sky at 10 o'clock at night or 10:30 after the sports centre, and I'd go and buy like a few magnums, like not magnums of champagne. I mean, literally
Ice
the
creams.
chocolate ice lollies, and sit and kind of, eat
was
those
that?
at
Why was
11
that,
o'clock.
do you think?
I
You
don't know,
just sort of-
and I didn't eat breakfast. I'd have chocolate instead. And I just got in this real self-destructive kind of frame of mind, I think, where I didn't value myself. Maybe, I don't know. It wasn't good. It wasn't a very healthy place, both physically and mentally, to be. And that was where then I'd started seeing this woman, Wendy, the acupuncturist, and I would say therapist, really. I started to realize that holistic approach to your health. It's everything, isn't it? That can keep you on track. It's not just, you can't let somebody be passive to therapy. I think, like you're not going to go sit and lie on somebody's couch and they're going to fix. You've got to kind of be part of that process.
Yeah.
You've got to do the things, be active and proactive. And once I started to realize that, the changes come quite quickly, I think, because you can see how much better you feel. So, and it's staying on track. And it's so easy to say it, isn't it? So I say, this is really good for you, try this. And it's that first step sometimes is quite
and
hard
also
to take.
sort of exposing your vulnerabilities, because that's something that people are not that comfortable doing. And I think especially from sort of our world of sports broadcasting, you're used to burying those, like any of the vulnerabilities, you're used to sort of suppressing them so that you can always be better than you need to be.
In control.
And in control,
yeah.
exactly. So sometimes it's quite nice and freeing, I think, to put yourself there, although really can be very uncomfortable to begin with, can't it?
Yeah, it can. And it doesn't necessarily mean when you experience that you are somehow going to ever get rid of grief.
No.
That's it becomes a companion that rears its head at times and makes you feel quite sad and melancholy and wistful, and there's a longing for kind of the life you had before. And then other times it's just there. It's okay. It's just there. And it's, that expression, grief is the price we pay for love. I think it was Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, wasn't it, who said that when Prince Philip died. And that is, I think that sums kind of grief up for me. It is about that love, but it is also about when a young person dies. I think it's a slightly added thing, is what could have been, and you can't help but keep doing that for a while.
It's completely, like you say, you can't
the
make sense
landmarks
of any of
life.
it. And like you say, there are landmarks. And so when you become a parent yourself, I definitely feel like I'm slightly overprotective of my kids because of the path in which we brought them into the world. I mean, is that a thing? Do you ever feel that way about Ruben and Lois because of what you've experienced?
There was first of all, I think when I had them, there was a real secondary kind of understanding of my parents' loss. I saw it in a different way and understood that the love that you have for your children is different to any other love that you have. And of course, fleeting kind of thoughts of, oh my God, imagine what that must feel like, and trying not to weigh myself down with those thoughts of what that would feel like, what they'd gone through. But then later, as they grew up, it was more, it kind of shocked me in a way, or I shouldn't have done, but when Ruben was heading towards 16, suddenly I was like, oh my gosh, he's the age, this is the time, and willing him to get to 16,
like wanting to almost speed it up so that he had.
So that he reached that landmark, because it was Daniel was a few months before his 16th birthday, and their birthdays are quite close together. Daniel and Ruben and Lois, they're like 3 days apart. And
did you share that, Gabby, with Kenny? Did you sort of internalize that, and that was something that you just wanted to get over yourself?
I did, and he understood it. He got that. And ironically, because Ruben was on a path in professional sport, because he was playing at Wasps Academy at the time, once you get beyond a certain age, I think it was just over his 16th birthday, they do a heart scan, because they want to check that the kids are all healthy. And that was also something quite seismic, because had Daniel had that as a professional sports person, he may never have died. And when Ruben was having that, of course, I wanted the results to be positive. And so obviously they were, and his heart was very healthy. And so that was also quite a moment, and getting that kind of email through saying your son will be having a heart scan next week when he comes to training, and you're like, oh my god, so yeah, it's not my job though I feel like to be overprotective of them, because it's not their fault.
No. and almost you've got, like you say, you don't want to project that onto them at all.
No, I want them to have the knowledge that I'm always here, and I'm, this is home, and I'm their mum, and that I love them more than the world. But I also want them to go and do all the things they want to do, and to push themselves and feel, to touch, things that are and maybe seen as a bit dangerous or risky, because I don't want them to not do things that involve a bit of risk. And I want them to understand risk, but I wouldn't ever stop them doing something that is, I'm talking things like, people always laugh with me that like Lois is a show jumper and Ruben plays rugby, they're kind of like, she's jumping over high things on a horse and, dealing with animals, and he's smashing into people. So, short of driving kind of a Formula One car around the track, really, there's, but I wouldn't ever want to wrap them in cotton wool and say don't do that, because I think that's unfair on them, isn't it?
Yeah, but it's also something that is, is what's the word to describe it? But you've obviously rationalised that in your mind, and it takes quite a lot for somebody who's gone through everything you've been through with Daniel to not allow that to sort of take over. Yeah, I think that comes through probably in my partnership with Kenny, and how we are as parents and how we are as people. He lost somebody very close to him. His cousin was like a brother, and he died when Kenny was 18. So very similar to me, but his cousin was older. His cousin was in his early 30s and had 2 small children, and was kind of the head cousin of loads of cousins. He was the oldest of, there's lots of boys in his family who all were farmers, very, very close-knit community, very close with each other. And he was one of 4 brothers, Hamish. And so when we met, we had this real commonality of experience. The 2 deaths had happened within a year of each other at the same age, pretty much, that we were in, and we met in our mid-20s. So we were kind of 5 years into that period. And I think because of that, he does get, what it can do to you and how it can sideswipe you. I can suddenly be talking about something completely inane, and it's just a wash of emotion.
Something comes up that just makes you okay.
Yeah, because we all have triggers to that stuff and things that we don't even think about. My daughter Bellatrix was involved in, do you remember there was that awful tragic accident at the study school in Wimbledon?
Yes.
And she was there on that day. And you're oh my God. I mean, it brings back all those kind of memories of what that moment was like. But, most pointedly, if you hear enough sirens go through the village and anyone go, it is like it's a reaction. It immediately brings something up that you're busy trying to suppress, but it is there. So there are those all over the place, aren't there? So I guess you have to just learn how to manage it.
Yeah. And also let it go. If you feel like you just need to, have an emotional kind of outburst in terms of crying or having a bit of a moment of sadness, it's better, I think, than keeping it in.
And I said right at the beginning of this pod that for me, you were a real trailblazer in our world of sports broadcasting. Do you think you would have taken those sorts of risks and dived into the world of sports broadcasting if it hadn't have been for everything that you'd experienced?
That's a really interesting question, because I wonder why I was attracted to that.
Yeah, because it would have been at the time. It was, you were a rare commodity and breaking new ground.
Yeah, I wasn't intending to be a sports broadcaster at all. I wanted to work in TV. I'd been on Blue Peter as a 16-year-old when I was a gymnast, and loved the live studio because I was doing gymnastics and I thought this was amazing, and wrote to the editor, how can I do this? And he kind of in a long-winded letter said, go to university. And so I went off to Durham to do law, and while I was there, I was working on local radio, but again, not thinking about sport, but because I spent so much time chatting to the sports desk I was doing the breakfast show, eventually when I graduated, that they said to me, on Saturdays, are you free? And I'm like, yeah. Why don't you do touchline interviews for us at St. James's Park? Because you really love the football and you talk about sport all the time with your colleagues. And so it was like a little fun Saturday job where I got a free ticket to the match, in a parking space. It wasn't a career. And when Sky saw me on the touchline, they got kind of piqued their interest because there weren't many women obviously around the game, and asked me to come down and do a screen test. Honestly, my view was, well, if I'm in London, that'll get me into broadcasting.
Wow.
As in, that's not a job kind of thing. That's a job, but it's a good place to be to find another job. because I still didn't really see it as where was I going to go from there. At the time, I just didn't see that many women. I think Helen Rollison was on the BBC doing Grandstand, but I didn't see that many women doing sports broadcasting. And, we didn't see many women doing sport on TV as well. So, yeah, I'm really now look back and think, well, I was attracted to it for some reason. I remember when I was doing my research at Sky, I was always looking at the dates of the footballers' birth dates. When your stats come through, and I would always be like, oh, he's the same age as Daniel. He's the same, he's the same year group. Would Daniel have been playing in this match? And so I suppose there was something that was connecting me to it and making me feel like it was a world I was certainly comfortable in, but also I could imagine, kind of him playing, and I could kind of like see, they were his contemporaries. And so I suppose at the beginning there was something of a comfort to it, and I really enjoyed it. It wasn't that I was doing it kind of, against my, will.
Do you think it made you braver as a broadcaster, because you dealt with, like you said earlier, about perspective, and like you said with your university colleagues, sort of saying, "Oh God, where am I going to live next year?" It's like such small stuff, such trivial stuff. I think also
it's a case of thinking, well, what's the worst that can happen here?
Exactly. So it's talking about football. How can it,
Yeah. So if I get something wrong, well, so what? Or if I don't ask, the question that the person thought they were getting, or if I next time I'll try and do it better, and that was kind of my attitude to it, I suppose. There was a bit of, and of course nobody likes constant criticism, but coming from the world of sport as well, having done quite high performance sport, I was used to critique, and that wasn't a problem to me. So fine, okay. And the job that I'm doing, I just wanted to get better at what I was, be better at it, and try and improve without kind of feeling that I was an imposter constantly.
But you don't feel like that anymore, right? You've completely parked that. I mean, you're surrounded by other female sports broadcasters who are absolutely
totally
nailing it. I mean, that doesn't feel like it anymore.
Yeah, now it's a completely different landscape. We've got so many great broadcasters, male and female, but so many more women working in television, sports television, and sports journalism, and radio and podcasts. And there's not just in front of the microphone and the camera, but also importantly behind. So the editor
and that makes a massive difference, because if people don't sort of know that, but if you're broadcasting a live show, a recorded show, whatever it might be, just the room, the production room that is in that conversation about what that show needs to look like, needs to, like you say, not just be about who's in front of camera. It has to come from all those different jobs, doesn't it, in the room that determine what the show looks like.
It's like any business, isn't it?
Of course.
If you have a business that you say, oh, we've got 50-50 male, female, and it turns out that all the women are doing the lowest paid jobs, then that's not 50-50. That is a hierarchy that is male dominated. And the same is this can be said about our industry. If all the women are secretaries and admin people, and they're not doing kind of jobs like being a director and producers and heads of departments, then we're not equal. So I think that is a really big development, and hearing women's voices in your ear telling you, their directors or their editors is really important. And I hope it's a much more welcoming place for women than it would have been kind of when we first started out, which was slightly, you had to walk.
Which was only about 10 years ago.
That's right, 5 or 6 years ago. It wasn't that it was. Oh, there were definitely male allies who were amazing, and we can't, and there were some great men that we worked with, but it was just it was more the societal kind of idea, that this is, I mean, look, it's so easy to slip back. What's going on in America at the moment in terms of, women's rights, and where that's heading is potentially quite frightening, and how quickly, those can be eroded. So I think it takes time. I always said it was like turning a tanker, and women's sport, for example, I used to kind of use that analogy that you've got to kind of turn people's opinions. It was no good having women's football matches that just were attended by women. We need everybody to be part of this journey and enjoy this sport. And so I think it's definitely a much more positive place.
100%. The shift is definitely happened, and it feels so much more inclusive now, and so much more comfortable an environment to actually work in. Final question, because I can't keep you forever, although I'd love to. Final question is about whether you've got a sign off yet. Have you thought through that first match? Because this is what I'd be doing. I'd be thinking, right, let's just have a little thing. Let's make it feel like it's completely spontaneous.
Well, the thing is, you don't want to make it about you, do you? Because it should be about the football.
But
what do you Do you think something like
I feel like the
wasn't
three
so bad,
of you,
was it?
if there's going to be a competition between the three of you, it's got to be the sign-off moment, hasn't it?
Well, the problem is the first weekend does only do match of the day, so one of us won't be on, obviously. So you know, I think if you obviously for the viewer, there's been 25 years almost of Gary Lineker presenting match of the day. So something along the lines of, well, that wasn't so bad, was it?
I knew you'd have thought about it.
but no, I think it's about the football, Georgie. The sign off will be about the games. The sign off will be about the matches. But I love the pundits, that we work with a lot. At
Yeah,
the
it's like a
BBC,
big
who are
family,
there.
isn't it? It's like a really big family. It's lovely.
And hopefully, they'll all feel really comfortable, because sometimes change can be hard for people, and they get comfy in something. But I think actually the broadcasting landscape now is so different in terms of people working for other stations.
Yeah,
When we were
it would
first
never have
starting
been
out,
like that way back when.
you all work for one station, whereas I do stuff for Prime Video. Chappers does stuff for Sky. Obviously Kelly works for Sky. So people are working all over, and I think that's a good thing in terms of cross-referencing your experiences and bringing in different people. So I think it's a kind of a new age, really. But look, Match of the Day is 71 years old this year, and our job is to make sure that it lasts another
71 years.
Yeah, not with us at the helm, obviously. Our job is to make sure that that something that people love and cherish is still as valued and is still as important, which is incredible, really, that Football Highlights show can kind of engender this kind of conversation, because there's so much live sport. I think the risk or the worry with Match of the Day years ago was that how's anybody going to still want to watch this, because there's so much live football. But it does have that place in people's hearts. It's got that kind of affection, and I really am enormously grateful and excited to be part of that.
Oh, I'm sending you so much luck and love for it, because I think it'll be fantastic. And with this new look group, you'll absolutely nail it, all three of you. Gabby, thank you so much for coming on. I know it's tricky to talk about the things that we've spoken about, but honestly, I'm so pleased that you came on and you did, because there doesn't get any more defining than a moment like we've spoken about this morning. And I think so many people who are listening out there and do have you on a pedestal about performance, it's important to share those vulnerabilities, because we've all got them.
Yeah, and I think the overriding message I would say to anybody who might be experiencing something like this in their life is that it does get better, and you can move on, and you will, and you'll take something from it that becomes a superpower to you.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thanks, Gabby.
Thank you so much, Georgie.